In this podcast episode, Andrew Bustamante, a former CIA officer, shares unprecedented insights into his covert operations, the complexities of national security, and the geopolitical turmoil facing the United States today. Over the course of the discussion, Bustamante touches on a wealth of topics, ranging from his personal experiences in intelligence work to broader issues surrounding America's future, international conflict, and evolving security threats. Bustamante begins by recounting his unusual path into the CIA, emphasizing that he was never the typical recruit groomed for success within the agency. Unlike many who rise through traditional ranks, he was often assigned challenging and dirty jobs, interacting with extremists, smugglers, and other unsavory characters. While he struggled with bureaucracy and conforming to rigid protocols, his wife, also a highly successful CIA officer, complemented his skills with operational excellence. Together, they were uniquely positioned to be entrusted with an unprecedented covert mission involving a breach within CIA's inner circles. This mission involved responding to the presence of a mole codenamed Scimitar inside one of CIA's most sensitive divisions, dubbed Falcon House in the book. With the risk of a high-placed intelligence leak severely compromising U.S. assets, the agency needed fresh operatives outside the usual channels to limit information exposure. Bustamante and his wife were chosen because they were unfamiliar faces in that sphere, allowing them to work with minimal suspicion. This operation became the basis of his new book, Shadow Cell, now released after years of negotiation with the CIA and a legal battle to lift classification restrictions. One of the most eye-opening parts of the discussion details the extraordinary level of secrecy imposed on CIA officers, even after their service. Bustamante explains that agents not one, but two secrecy agreements, one civil and one criminal, creating a sort of double jeopardy for unauthorized disclosures. This intense framework often silences officers long after they have left the agency, limiting public understanding of covert operations. Bustamante's and his wife's efforts to publish their story were longest and most difficult for these reasons. Initial approval from CIA was later overturned due to concerns about ongoing sensitive operations, especially as global tensions escalated with the Ukraine war and rising espionage activity. It was not until Bustamante's wife legally challenged the classification through a prominent attorney specializing in classified cases, threatening a First Amendment lawsuit, that the CIA relented. This struggle highlights the balance intelligence agencies try to maintain between transparency and operational security, and why many truths remain hidden from the public. One of the most innovative revelations shared by Bustamante involves how he and his wife radically altered intelligence collection methods in response to the mole threat. Traditional CIA operations, which heavily rely on hierarchical, centralized information flow, were deemed too vulnerable to internal leaks. Instead, the two adapted tactics learned from terrorist networks like Al-Qaeda, embracing decentralized cell structures that limit knowledge of broader operations to upper leadership only. This concept resembles how sleeper cells function in extremist organizations. Small, autonomous groups maintain secrecy, individually independent of higher command regarding tactical details, only informing leaders of outcomes. By adopting this approach within the CIA, Bustamante and his wife created a new covert shadow cell that restricted information flow, reducing susceptibility to a mole's infiltration. Although the mole was eventually apprehended through cumulative efforts, this approach has reshaped how intelligence might be collected and protected in an era of increased insider threats. While Bustamante's recounting avoids revealing direct details about Scimitar, he explains the gravity of having a high-placed mole inside the CIA's collection unit. The mole could access leadership's strategic plans and intentions, a catastrophic vulnerability. The fact that the agency initially withheld the mole's existence from the operatives tasked with fixing internal weaknesses shows a stark lack of transparency and placed Bustamante and his wife unwittingly in a partial bait role. This disturbing operational secrecy exemplifies an intelligence culture driven by compartmentalization and self-preservation, sometimes at the expense of those on the front lines. Although the mole was caught years later, the ensuing damage could have been profound. Bustamante's experience underscores the inherent dangers of insider threats in intelligence communities and the continuous need for adaptive countermeasures. Shifting from espionage, Bustamante discusses his background in the Air Force, especially his time at Malmstrom Air Force Base, one of the primary sites housing Minuteman nuclear missiles. He brings critical insight into the series of strange incidents involving nuclear missile systems being inexplicably disabled, phenomena often linked with reported UFO sightings near nuclear facilities. Drawing from his personal military experience, he affirms that these unidentified objects are not necessarily extraterrestrial, but represent unknown aerial threats that have legitimate national security implications. The Pentagon's recent disclosures, including claims that some UFO reports were disinformation related to internal Air Force culture and EMP tests, are met with skepticism by Bustamante. He explains the complexity of electromagnetic pulse, EMP testing in nuclear silos, emphasizing the risks of testing such weapons near operational nuclear warheads. He indicates some of these narratives may be misinformed or deliberately obfuscated, highlighting the murky world of military secrecy, misinformation, and media narratives that surround the UFO topic. The conversation also sheds light on the tangled relationship between military contractors, black budgets, and classified projects. Companies like Booz Allen Hamilton and Boeing, intimately involved in defense contracts, wield significant influence over national security programs, including nuclear weapons maintenance and intelligence analysis. Bustamante offers insight into how these relationships drive a shadow economy fueled by black budget spending, money that often evades public accountability and congressional oversight. The black budget grows by recycling untraceable profits generated by covert fake businesses, used as fronts for intelligence gathering and clandestine operations. This financial opacity creates challenges in tracking the true scale of defense and intelligence expenditures, contributing to the massive figures regularly reported as missing from Pentagon accounts. Bustamante elaborates on how illicit and sophisticated methods, including cryptocurrency and offshore financial maneuvers, increasingly facilitate discreet funding of covert operations internationally. Throughout the chat, Bustamante takes a critical view of American politics and power dynamics. He argues that while presidents and elected officials may appear to wield tremendous power, in reality, they often function as actors constrained by entrenched financial and industrial interests. Campaign promises are tools for electoral gain rather than genuine policy intentions, and politicians are beholden to industry lobbyists, wealthy investors, and conglomerates who pull strings from behind the scenes. The concept of kingmakers emerges, wealthy individuals and lobbying groups who sway political agendas to protect their financial interests. Bustamante critiques the professionalization of politics, where career politicians perpetuate a system focused on re-election, personal gain, and maintaining the status quo rather than earnest governance. This disillusionment extends to public faith, exacerbated by limited voter engagement and susceptibility to media-driven distractions. Another theme Bustamante addresses is the modern information ecosystem dominated by social media platforms and content algorithms. He highlights how platforms such as YouTube and Twitter operate to maximize engagement, often amplifying divisive or sensational content irrespective of its informational quality. Algorithms reward content generating more interactions, be it likes, dislikes, or contentious comments, creating echo chambers and polarized silos that distort public discourse and cultivate mass psychosis. At the same time, Bustamante acknowledges the pressures on platforms to enforce censorship, driven by government and intelligence community mandates aimed at countering foreign disinformation. This intersection of corporate interests, government influence, and algorithmic decision-making results in selective amplification or suppression of voices, leading to concerns over centralization of information control and erosion of free expression. Bustamante paints a sobering picture of America's geopolitical and economic future. He stresses that the country is facing multiple simultaneous crises, including an unsustainable national debt projected to rise to over $50 trillion within the next decade, eroding economic dominance and waning global influence of the U.S. dollar. Wealthy individuals and investors are already diversifying assets globally in anticipation of economic instability, purchasing real estate abroad, and obtaining foreign residencies. His assessment of the international arena is similarly bleak. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine is unlikely to resolve swiftly. Instead, it serves as a proxy battleground for larger geopolitical contests involving China, Iran, and other powers. Bustamante asserts that the U.S. benefits strategically from the prolonged conflict weakening Russia, while Russia aims to control eastern Ukraine's vital resources that underpin its economy. Diplomatic negotiations are complicated by domestic political considerations and competing agendas. When discussing nuclear threats, Bustamante demystifies popular conceptions grounded in total annihilation. He argues that the most realistic and imminent danger lies not in the use of massive strategic nuclear arsenals, but in tactical battlefield nuclear weapons or smaller, portable devices potentially falling into the hands of non-state actors, cartels, or rogue states. The short decision windows in nuclear command structures create enormous risks, including the possibility of accidental or miscalculated launches and the difficulties of command continuity in case of assassinations. He details the limitations of current missile defense systems, pointing out low accuracy rates and vulnerabilities exposed during recent Iranian missile strikes. Moreover, he emphasizes that a true global thermonuclear war would be devastating, but the likelihood remains minimal given mutual assured destruction doctrines. Instead, smaller-scale nuclear events, including covert tactical strikes, represent a more plausible existential threat in the near future. The conversation turns to domestic policy as Bustamante confronts the contentious issue of immigration with a frank stance. He insists on the importance of following legal pathways and does not excuse unauthorized border crossings. However, he also recognizes the economic necessity of immigrant labor, especially in sectors such as agriculture and construction, where American workers often refuse physically demanding jobs. He calls for pragmatic reforms to immigration policy, making it easier for both skilled and unskilled workers to enter legally, reflecting market demands while enforcing legal frameworks. ICE enforcement actions that target workers provoke complex humanitarian and economic questions. Bustamante criticizes ineffective policies that penalize businesses reliant on immigrant labor without offering viable alternatives or pathways to inclusion.